is prepare to work hard, and give it the runway that it deserves. And when I say what I mean by runway is, it's going to take longer than what you think to be successful. I think people are looking for short-term wins, right? Get rich quick, whatever it is. But if you think in terms of decades, instead of in the next 2 years, I'm going to make this much money, right? If you think in terms of, put some longevity behind your plan, right? And then go execute on your plan, because the correct expectations will be set. You'll build a solid foundation. You'll learn a ton along the way. You'll have a lot of fun. But that's kind of, I guess that would be my advice is, think a little longer term instead of short term.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Rick Garcia. And Rick started out in high school, and in his own words, he was a hustler to make money. He also played baseball for a bit, and then entered into the workforce and didn't do well holding a job. Again, in his own words, went through, I think it was around 15 jobs or so. And then his aunt and his wife at the time, now ex-wife, worked at American Airlines, so he went and worked there. Also wanted to be a lawyer, and so did some undergraduate work and or studied the degree, but then decided he didn't want to be a lawyer either, and so read a book that was Think and Grow Rich, and was thinking or looking onto things that he could grasp onto based on that. Moved to Texas, started working for a telecom company in a sales job, figured out that was how to monetize his passion, joined another company, made an exit, started his current business, and has also been joining and acquiring a couple other businesses along the way. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Rick.
Thanks, Devin. I appreciate it. I forgot we shared that much, so it's interesting to make all that public. That's great.
Absolutely. So makes for a full and a good journey. So with that, now let's go back a bit in time to when you were in high school, what were hustling to make money, and how your journey got started there.
Yeah, I think it goes before high school, to be honest, right? I mean, I was a kid that would mow your lawn. I'd knock on your door, ask you if you wanted to have your lawn mowed, and rolled around in a riding mower and things like that. So I was fortunate enough to have one of those guys around. But so I think it started a bit before high school, but rolled into high school, played a lot of sports, played baseball forever. When I finished there, I started out with a little college ball, and then quickly realized that that's not making my, it's not going to achieve my financial success by trying to play, extend my high school sort of experience and play some more ball. So, figured out then, during that time, I started to have these small jobs, a restaurant or a fast food place, kind of the normal high school sort of jobs. Didn't like any of them really. I didn't like any of them. Maybe I was a bit entitled, perhaps. I mean, now that I'm an adult, and I feel like I'm an adult and have a better understanding of what I was thinking then, it may have been a little entitlement or something like that, but it didn't do well at holding a job. I always thought I could do something more, it could be more aggressive and do this and do that. So that's kind of where it rolled into. I will say that I tried a lot of different things growing up as a kid to hustle and make some money. I lived fairly close. So I was in Texas, is where I worked for American Airlines, and I ended up moving to Seattle. But there I was pretty close to the Mexican border, as an example. So I sold some blankets before, I sold lots of different things. I had friends that were doing lots of email campaigns when I was just getting out of high school, and this was well before canned spam. And so I did a little emailing for your own sort of nutritional brands and all that stuff. So I kind of figured that out for a little while and did some of that. But there was a lot of sort of trial and error. I had a tobacco license in Texas and sold cigars online, so there was quite a few things that I had kind of given a run, but nothing really stuck. I didn't know what I didn't know, to be honest.
Now, one
And
question I'll ask is that's a whole bunch of very different jobs and pretty well across the board. Sounds like a lot of fun, or at least a lot of different opportunities. But was it that it was a hard time holding down a job because you didn't like having a boss over you? Was it just you hadn't found something that you enjoyed, and so it was kind of a slug? Or you're saying, or you mentioned maybe a bit of entitlement earlier on, or kind of what made you kind of decide to move between jobs, or what was it about those jobs that just didn't quite suit you?
yeah, so I will say this: I was during that trial and error sort of period of kind of wanting to start something. I did have those jobs off and on. When I landed at American Airlines, I think I was 20 years old or so. I landed at American Airlines. I stayed there for about 5 years, and the reason I stayed there for 5 years is because, like I told you, I had my aunt and my future bride, ex-wife now, but my future bride there, they were both working next to me all the time. And so I had no choice but to really sort of settle down, accept a little bit of responsibility, and be productive. And so not always thinking about what else was I going to do. Right. But in my mind, I'd finished that and I'd always had something else that I was working on or trying to do. And I look at that today and I go, boy, what a loser. That's kind of what I think about myself. Right. But I wasn't quite fulfilled in just kind of working a job and feeling like a job was going to be what I was going to do. So that was early on. I did not feel that I was going to work for someone early on.
Now you're saying, okay, no, a bit of a mixture of finding what you're wanting to do, not wanting to work for someone else, figuring out what that means for you and where that's going to lead you. And so you're settled on the job of the airlines, and you do that, you said, for was it 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, kind of so you worked it sounds like, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, that was it during that time or after that time you also thought about being a lawyer and reading the book, or kind of
That
how did
was
you transition, or kind of going from there, or going those different areas?
Yeah. So I started off in college, doing a criminal justice degree, did that for, 3 years, I think. And like I said, I was kind of on that extended plan. I went to college for 6 years. Right. And so I tried a lot of different classes and tried to figure out what it was. But when I went to this orientation for law school, and then I met a bunch of people there, and I was like, these people are really serious about their job. These are about their careers. And I didn't feel like a grown-up. I'm a summer baby essentially. So I was a bit younger when I graduated high school, but I still didn't feel like I was anywhere near equipped, probably intellectually, to be honest. I was probably, a bit sort of, not embarrassed, but a bit intimidated. Right. And when I, entered a room with a bunch of smart people, I was like, oh boy, this may not be for me. So that was during that time. So that was all right after high school, and then running for the next 5 years, trying to figure out if that's what I was going to do. Right. You always have these aspirations. It's interesting. I'm going through this now with, thinking about my current relationship. You always have these grand sort of ideas of what you're going to do in life. Right. And when reality starts to set in you may not achieve what you initially thought you were going to achieve. You get a little discouraged. And so I think that's where I kind of hit on with being a lawyer. So I was trying to figure out what was going to be next, where was I going to go? And then, I ended up moving to Seattle with my girlfriend and working at the phone company. I had 2 job offers when I arrived to Seattle. Number 1 was Alaska Airlines, and number 2 was US West, the phone company. And I thought, I've already done the airline thing for a good while, and it's colder in Seattle than it is in Texas. It's wetter in Seattle than it is in Texas. And I thought, well, I don't want to be outside at all. So I ended up taking the phone company job. And that's kind of where things kind of kicked off. And at the time I was reading a bunch of motivational material, right? So maybe it was some Tony Robbins, maybe it was some Zig Ziglar, maybe it was, lots of different things, but Think and Grow Rich and Napoleon Hill certainly was a book that I kind of carried. I didn't carry it along with me literally, but I kind of had that as, what I had remembered. And I think I read it 23 times or so.
That's a good amount of time to read it, and hopefully a bit of it sunk in, and it definitely makes sense. So you say, okay, bounced around a lot, did the airlines for a bit of time, thought about being a lawyer, now, and then decided, okay, gonna go into the telecoms. And I think we chatted a bit before, it was also the more of the sales position and selling that was interesting to you, and hopefully not putting too many words in your mouth.
No.
But then I believe that after you kind of found that was a bit more where you're passionate about and how you can monetize that passion, you went and joined a different company and then made an exit at one point. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'll walk you through that. So essentially what happens is I work at the phone company for 5 years, and they do an excellent job of training you. They do an excellent job of teaching you the very basics of things, right? And then kind of releasing you out. So we did that. And that was, again, it was 5 years worth of training there. I went to a competitive phone company after that. It was MCI. At that time, I kind of figured out, here's the deal. This is my skill, or this is not just selling, but selling was certainly where I kind of excelled, but telecom in general is where I'm going to, make my living. And I forced myself, right. And this is the early 2000s, late 90s and early 2000s, when everyone was kind of migrating to software, and software was the cool thing, right. I stayed in telecom. I forced myself to stay in telecom because I felt like you needed to put in your time into whatever, every book tells you, right? You're going to do a business that right? It's something that and so I forced myself to stay in telecom, went to MCI for a couple of years, and then I went to a small company after that. And the small company I went to, in fact, the former CEO of that company, he's long sold out of the telecom space. Now he owns 20 or 30 luxury car dealerships around the country, right? But I learned so much from him in the course of 2 years. It was a small telecom company. And that was when I realized, look, I could start my own telecom company. I could do my own telecom. This is not, it's a difficult business because it's a regulated business and there's a lot of components to it. But when you know the business, thank you very much, US West, for the training, right? And MCI. And when you know the business, it's something that you think of and you go, I can actually do this. And again, going back to my Napoleon Hill is, is acquired specific applied knowledge, right? You can monetize specific applied knowledge. So if you know something very, very well, you can build a business around it, right? Better than anybody else, you can build a business around it. So I went to that small company, sold, that company sold. I wasn't a shareholder in that. I was just, I was the leadership in their sales department, essentially. And then I went to another company. In this company, it was called 360 Networks. And 360 Networks was a carrier for the carrier. So what I got to see, for a person that knew I was going to one day be in the telecom business for myself, I looked at this and I thought, well, I could go to the largest carriers in the country, and I can speak to their leadership. I understand what they're doing. I understand their marketplace, and I get to see how they acquire customers. So I had this sort of perched view on hundreds of companies and how they operated. And so for me, it was like, oh, this is exciting, right? I get to see how everything runs. And so I was fortunate enough to stay in that role 6 or 7 years, and then ended up doing some mergers and acquisitions for them at that same company. So acquiring different organizations and bundling them with our organization at that time. When we sold that business, I started G12 Communications.
Oh, and that makes sense. So you sold that business, said, okay. And I like how you hit on, when you become an expert in the, or gain a lot of experience in a given area, it does lend itself to saying, why don't I do it? Now, some people are saying, I don't want to be or run my own business, and I don't want to take on that, additional stress or additional, those type of things. But on the other hand, if you're more entrepreneur minded or want to do it on your own, you're saying, okay, I can figure this out. I can do it now. Sometimes you get into it and you figure out, hey, that was a lot harder than I thought it would be. But nonetheless, it gives you a foundation to build from. And I think that is oftentimes the impetus for, what moves you to make that leap. And so now you make that leap, you go start your own business, you're building that, you're growing it, and you're saying, I can do this. How did it go? In other words, was it a great success and skyrocket to the top, or was it bumpy and, had the good times and the bad times? Was it all downhill, or kind of how did it go for you?
I'll say this, for those of you who want an 8-to-5 job and who want to knock off at the end of the day and let the TV wash over you and hang out in a lounger, being an entrepreneur isn't for you. Because I didn't know what I didn't know. All the little starts and stops along the way, the 10 little businesses that I kind of dabbled in to try here and there. all of them were part of why we succeeded at G12, right? But you get into a business and you think you know what you're doing. And then you quickly realize that this gets really, really deep and it gets really, really hard. And there's no one behind you. There's no one to help shake it off. There's no one to help, alleviate the aggravation, the stress, right? The just the hard work. There's no one to alleviate from you. You are the backstop for everything. And so it was rough. I will say it was a rough start. We started, it was me and a partner, we started together. And one thing that I learned along the way is, there's some things that some people are good at, and there's some things that, that others aren't. So here's how it ended up. I was not the financial and legal guy, but I partnered up with a financial and legal guy. Right. And so that made all the difference in the world. Right. And to boot, he had a work ethic at the time, just as strong as mine. And so, we could really work through anything together. So that's really what's been just, I've heard the saying, so the best business partners are me, myself, and I, right? But ultimately, I'm very fortunate to work with this individual because he brings a level of sophistication to our legal and financial and corporate organization that I couldn't bring, right? I could bring product development. I can bring, selling the product. I can build the product and support the product, but I couldn't bring those other corporate sort of skill sets, right? And so having a partner with me to do that has been great. But I will tell you, at the very beginning, it was rough. And we're a phone company, right? So early on, I can tell you, I probably shouldn't say this, is kind of funny, but, we take some boxes and go hand deliver them to some places. Before, we kind of didn't know, kind of everything that we need to know. So just to check it out and just to see how it worked out. So our first few customers hand delivered some things. In fact, in a law office, one of our very first customers in a law office, I saw the lead attorney fell down, had basically a stroke in the hallway. And they ran to our phones and dialed 911. And I remember thinking in my head, wow, I hope 911 is going to work. I mean, we've done everything right. Let's see if this 911 works. And
that's not at the time you want to or have something go wrong.
I was in the office when this happens, right? And I'm just like, wow. And the authorities were there, and I was like, oh, we did everything right. We did do everything right. But it's like this is you just don't know what you don't know. And so it's very, very hard. I will say that once you do it for a while, we're a 10-year-old, 11-year-old company now. Now we've got, 50 people, and, there's, job recs open for people, and growing. And now, we're kind of the old kid on the block now, essentially, right? It's like we know exactly what we're doing. We're scaling appropriately. Not too fast, not too slow. And now it's a fun organization to be a part of. And you look at this and you go, that was, call it 7 or 8 years of just real grind. Get your overalls on, you got your shovel and you're digging, so it was 7 or 8 years of a real grind. And, the last 4 or 5 years have just been amazing.
No, and I think that, but I think that there's a lot of commonalities in the sense that most people, I think that you go into a business with a lot of naivety in the sense, it'll be a year or two, and then we'll just take off, and then we'll get things in place, and we'll have all these customers, and we'll be so busy we don't know what to do. Occasionally that's the case, and I'm sure that happens, but I think for the vast majority it is. That first while is a grind, and then you get a bit more success and you get a bit more stability, and it's still a grind. And then you actually have a company that you're saying, okay, we're doing well, and it's still a grind. And so I don't think, I like that how you said, if you wanted to do an 8 to 5 clock in, clock out, let TV wash over you, I don't think it's now. On the other hand, I think that you also have a lot of fun. You can be the direct your own destiny, and you can have a lot more control, and you can be a lot, you can have a lot of reward and the success and freedom, but it has to be with the understanding it's not just going to be like it's on TV where you go into work and work for a couple hours in the morning, you go get a lunch off, take off early, and life is just miraculously wonderful and you never have to work again. I think it's far from that, but I think there's also that as you get big, or as you have that patience, you get that more stable or business with the building success. So I think that's a great takeaway. Well, as that kind of brings us up to where you're at today, and kind of walks us through your journey, I always end off the podcast with a couple of questions. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what'd you learn from it?
The worst business decision I've ever made. I think the worst business decision I made was really early on. I will tell you, early on, you try to cut corners. And what I mean by cutting corners is you don't hire an expert where you need an expert. You don't hire, someone who knows something that you don't know, and you just try to wing it, right? Or you'll fix it later. Let's just get this done and you'll fix it later. And in some cases, that comes back to really, really bite you. So I think some of the worst decisions I've ever made were around, to be honest, not doing some legal documents properly, or hiring an attorney to do some legal documents properly. Whether that's, maybe a small asset purchase, an asset purchase agreement, you know what I mean? Just stuff like that. Hiring the right individuals to do the serious stuff. Like if you're gonna cut corners, and I don't advise cutting corners anymore now that I'm a little more seasoned, right? But when you're bootstrapping, you make some good decisions to move you forward because you're trying to kick the door down, and you also make some really bad decisions. And so what I would say is, well, here's what I've learned where it really, really matters. And I would say financial decisions, legal decisions, corporate structure, stuff like that, where it really, really matters. You really need some experts in your corner, and you can talk to a lot of different people. There's a lot of resources out there, and you can do it inexpensively if you needed to. But boy, having the right resources, not necessarily in place, but finding the right resources. Be resourceful instead of being cheap. Okay, so that's what I would say is important to learn.
No, and I think that it is that a bit of that catch-22 as you're getting going, and it is you're always having more things to spend money on than money to spend as a startup and a small business as you're just getting started, and you're saying, okay, do I spend it on payroll? Do I spend it on rent? Do I spend it on product development or marketing? Or do I spend it on legal? Or do I spend it on accounting? And you're saying all of these competing things, and I think it is, to your point, first of all, you're having to balance competing interests, but you need to realize, okay, where are the areas where I can be resourceful? I may be able to do it on my own, at least for a period of time with some sweat equity, and where are the experts that, hey, I really just have to have somebody that knows what they're doing here, because it's going to either hamper the business or set it up for failure or anything else if I don't. And having that ability to understand or to navigate that, I think is a great takeaway. But it's also easy to understand how you can make that mistake of saying, hey, I don't have the money, I'll do it myself, when you really don't have the resources or the ability to do it. So I think that's definitely a good lesson to learn and an easy mistake to make.
Yeah.
Following up that, the second question I always ask is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Boy, if you're there and you decided to do it, how exciting for you. It's very exciting, right? I wouldn't do anything different. I love my business. I love being in business. I love that, our employees are my family essentially, and we support their families, and it's the best thing that I've ever done, right? Start G12. But what I would say is prepare to work hard, and give it the runway that it deserves. And when I say what I mean by runway is, it's going to take longer than what you think to be successful. I think people are looking for short-term wins, right? Get rich quick, whatever it is. But if you think in terms of decades, instead of in the next 2 years, I'm going to make this much money, right? If you think in terms of, put some longevity behind your plan, right? And then go execute on your plan, because the correct expectations will be set. You'll build a solid foundation. You'll learn a ton along the way. You'll have a lot of fun. But that's kind of, I guess that would be my advice is, think a little longer term instead of short term.
Yeah, no, and I think that's if nothing else, is a good takeaway. And a lot of times you're saying, hey, everything's, I got to put out the fires now that are the most urgent. And there's some truth to that. If you have fires and it's going to burn the building down or your business down, so to speak, you need to do that. But if all you're doing is putting out today's fires and never looking at the long term, you're forever going to be running a short-term business that isn't going to or have the success that you need. So I like that, having that long-term outlook on it. So with it, as we wrap up the podcast, we wrap up this episode. If people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, so the website's g12com.com. It's g12com.com. You could head over to g12com.com. You could send me an email, rgarcia@g12com.com. Find me on LinkedIn. It's Rick Garcia. At G12, you'll find me on LinkedIn there. So feel free to reach out, send me a note. We'd love to chat and meet you and listen to your story, and maybe we'll trade stories. And it's fun to talk to entrepreneurs all the time.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, connect, and support a great business, especially if you're looking at anything in the telecom. And with that, as we wrap up the podcast, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. Also, as a listener, if you can make sure to click subscribe, click like, click follow, click share, because we want to make sure that everybody finds out about all these awesome episodes. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your business, with any patents, trademarks, or anything else, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Thank you again, Rick, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks for having me, Devin. Take care.